To me, family is pretty tricky. I have complicated relationships with my family of origin, and I have people that I'm not blood related to that I consider family. Um, but defining the word itself, I guess I know it when I feel it. um, they're the people that I would drop anything for. Love is putting someone else's needs above your own. Um, as long as that's reasonable, like to the extent that you possibly can. Um, I know sometimes that's a tricky line to walk, and some people have a lot more needs than others, but um, really being there for someone in a meaningful way for them and not just in a way that makes you feel good. Neutral or positive representation to balance out the long history of negative representation or just absence that the community has had in those arenas of media and politics is probably a step in the right direction, but we can't, as a community, put the whole burden of making life better for LGBTQ people on the hands of a few queer legislators or a few queer celebrities. Um, and, who's to say that they're not closeted too, right? Um, so just making a more welcoming world on an individual and a community basis, um, to me, that's more important than having, a lesbian actor play a lesbian character. It was COVID. For like this is the case for a lot of trans people, I think. Um, I was super alone. I had just moved to a new state, across the country from where I lived and where I grew up and where a lot of my friends and family were. And I didn't have any roommates. I got an apartment by myself, and I had two cats, and that was the extent of my socialization that year. So I was listening to a lot of podcasts, going for a lot of walks, and just listening more to like my own intuition and the things that my body was telling me. And I realized during that time that I didn't like the gender that I was assigned for me. Love women, support women. But I just was like, yeah, no, that doesn't really fit anymore. Like I've sort of outgrown it. Um, and it was, a long process. I think for a lot of people, there's not really a precise moment that you can point to. Um, but when I finally started coming out in 2021, that was a really big step. To me, freedom is not freedom from consequences, but freedom of action. So you can do whatever you want, uh, but you should know that you're not free from consequences. I guess I would say that I have a lot of good examples of like equal partnerships, even in hetero couples in my life. So I didn't have like bad examples of marriage necessarily. Um, but I've always been like really set against marriage for myself. Uh, and I think that's because of all of the legal and societal things that are tied to it. Like the connotation of marriage is very negative for me. For teenagers, I think something that a lot of them struggle with is the amount of control that adults have over their lives, their parents or guardians. So I would just say, hang in there. It gets better. You will have a little bit more agency and ability to self determine how you want to act, who you want to date, the way that you want to express yourself in just a few short years. Most teenagers, they can get out of the house sometime around 18 if they're lucky, and and they can have a little bit more control over their own lives. I would tell them that their kid coming out to them is a huge act of trust, and if they can't find it within themselves to respect who their child is telling them that they are, then that parent is really betraying that trust. And that's something their kid won't forget ever. Yeah, I think my little sister, she's 4 years younger than me. Um, she had a lot of gender queer, non-binary, trans people in her life before I came out, and I wasn't necessarily friends with them, but they were in her orbit, and I heard about them through her, and I knew that she would be a safe person to tell. So she was the first person who I told, and my sister's been wonderful about not misgendering me, reminding other people to correct themselves if they do misgender me, and just generally like has really had my back. I think I had um, this huge amount of stress that I didn't realize because I was performing a gender, um, and it came from this fear of being found out or thought of as like a failed woman or a not meeting the standards, whatever the standards are. The goalposts always change, right? Femininity is so policed in our society. Can't be too fat, can't be too skinny. You have to work out and eat right, and if you don't do those things, you're a slob. But if you do them too much, you have an eating disorder, and we're gonna make fun of you either way. And wear makeup, don't wear makeup. Everyone has an opinion about you and your body, and I mean, that's still true to an extent, being trans, right? But I feel so much more comfortable not having to self police constantly and check all the time. Am I doing it right? Am I doing what people would expect? And just stepping outside of that box is really freeing. Um, I wouldn't say that my life changed a ton, other than having to introduce myself a little bit differently, and some medical things as well. But it's been fairly manageable for me, which is honestly a huge privilege to say because I have health insurance and all the things that you would need to make a transition a little bit easier. I would ask them to genuinely sit with themselves and do like the 5 layers of why exercise. Like, why do you think this? And figure out where that takes them, because if it's a place of like fear, or if it just stops at this is what my preacher said, I think those are places that are people recognize as not necessarily coming from within themselves, right? Most people don't want to live their lives acting from a place of fear. They want to live their lives acting from a place of joy. Um, and if they're afraid of something because it's the unknown, well, you can learn about queer people. Like, we're out there in the world. We're in every town and city in the United States, whether we're out or not. Um, and you have the whole internet to learn. So I think it's just good to really interrogate where that sense of hatred or dislike or animosity comes from.